As most of you know, my mother died just over 2 months ago. I'm going to her funeral in Pennsylvania next Sunday. It was delayed because of the winter weather that they have back east. Although I was not with her during her actual passing, that took place on a Sunday morning, and as it turned out, I was here with all of you at the time. I was very fortunate to be with her for most of the 5 days just before that. I was able to be present for her journey toward God as she step by step slipped away from this life and approached the next. Throughout it all, she was so relaxed, so peaceful, so open to what was happening. There was no feeling of sorrow or loss. It was clear that she was on her way to another place, a place that she was more than ready for, a place that she longed for even, a place that in her own quiet way she was struggling to reach. It was beautiful. I felt privileged to be with her for this, and I wondered what it was actually like to die. The thing is, during the long hours I spent with her then, the place to which she was headed did not seem far away at all. It was present, but unseen, a reality everywhere around us, but veiled from sight, a reality affirmed in today's selection from the book of Revelations, which reads, and I quote, "See, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them as their God. They will be his people. And God himself will be with them. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more. For the first things have passed away." End quote. You see, the line between us and eternity is so very thin. On the one hand, God is here among us. God is with us throughout all our daily struggles. God is with us in our doubt and fear, our hope, our trust. On the other hand, we ourselves are only a step away from God in eternity. Only a step away from a place where, to repeat the reading, God will wipe every tear from our eyes and where death will be no more. Ironically, my earliest sense of such a reality occurred long, long ago, and my mother was present then too. In fact, it was just she and I. This happened during my one and only visit to Yosemite National Park. I think I was about 5 years old at the time. It was a family camping trip. There were 5 of us in all: my father, my mother, my younger sister, and my brother, who was then only a toddler, and I. We arrived at the park quite late the night before, and my sister, brother, and I had all fallen asleep in the car. So my first memory of Yosemite was waking up in a tent. It was very early. My dad, sister, and brother were still asleep, but my mother was up. She had just come back from a walk. Seeing that I was awake, she leaned down to my ear and whispered, "Want to see something?" She sounded excited. I leapt from my sleeping bag at once, slipped on my clothes, and followed her into the crisp, cold morning air. She led me along a path to the bank of a river. The water was flowing fast and shallow, and it was so pure. Never in my life had I seen water so clear, so utterly transparent. As I watched, the water sparkled and danced, and yet I could see every pebble beneath its surface. The water mesmerized me. But that wasn't what my mother had taken me to see. Instead, she pointed up. "Look there," she said. I followed her gaze. It took me a moment to find it, but at last there it was, high, high above me. I saw a cascade of water flowing over the edge of a distant cliff. This was one of the famous Yosemite waterfalls. It seemed so far off, so remote. The water shot from the edge of the cliff, a rock, then slowly began to fall. But here was the amazing part. About a third of the way down, the water just vanished. As it left the edge of the cliff, the water had slowly begun to spread out. The stream got wider and wider. Then all at once it was gone. It had disappeared. I couldn't believe it. Where did it go? I said to my mother. Where did the water go? My mother motioned to the river. Look down, she said. Look closely. I stared where she pointed. At last I saw it. Tens of thousands of tiny droplets. An all but invisible spray falling like rain. Up above, the river had been a single body of water. Now here it was again, a single body of water. In between, the current had broken into millions upon millions of individual droplets. So many, in fact, that the river had seemed to disappear, but it hadn't. It was still flowing. It was still flowing in the same direction. It was still a river. It had just expanded. Now, down below, it had regathered itself. It was magical. Years later, I began to question this memory. Could it be accurate, I thought? It was just so vivid. And yet the picture in my mind seemed so improbable. I began to wonder if I had imagined the whole thing. I sought for explanations. And at some point, I discovered a book by the Japanese writer Shunryu Suzuki, where he too describes a visit to Yosemite. I came across this passage, and I quote, I went to Yosemite Park, and I saw some huge waterfalls. The highest of these is 1,430 feet high. And from it, the water comes down like a curtain thrown from the top of the mountain. It does not seem to come down swiftly, as you might expect. It seems to come down very slowly because of the distance. And the water does not come down in one stream, but is separated into many tiny streams. From a distance, it looks like a curtain. And I thought, it must be a very difficult experience for each drop of water to come down from the top of such a high mountain. It takes time, you know, a long time, for the water finally to reach the bottom of the waterfall. And it seems to me that human life may be like this. We have many difficult experiences in life, but at the same time, I thought the water was not originally separated, but was one whole river. Only when it's separated does it have some difficulty falling. It is as if the water does not have any feeling when it is one river. Only when separated into many tiny droplets can it begin to have or express some feeling. Unquote. There it is, I thought. That's the waterfall as I remember it, broken into millions of tiny individual droplets. And yes, as he said it, I saw that it was exactly like human life. We're all like those separate little droplets. We each think of ourselves as detached units. There's me, there's you, there's him, there's her. We see ourselves as distinct blobs of protoplasm, independent collections of bone and blood and muscle and sinew, all stuffed into a bag of skin, each completely separate from all other bags of skin that surround us. And in one sense, that's true. But in a larger sense, it's not true at all. Not really. The fuller reality is that we're all part of one another. We're all interconnected. We're all part of the river. It's all part of the one that is also the all. We are part of one great reality, an eternal mystery that no words can name, but which many of us indicate with a single three-letter tag, God. We came from that reality, that one, that mystery, that unending river, that reality that some of us call God. And sooner or later, we will return to that reality once again. And yet at the same time, we have never left it. We are each part of it right now, although in a form that makes us feel ourselves as separate. How true this image of a great river tumbling over the edge of a vast chasm and breaking into droplets that only return to the bottom seemed to me. How like these drops we seemed. I thought of all the PBS shows that I had seen that show slow motion footage of drops of water falling. Viewed individually, these separate droplets began to seem rather lonely to me. It was a projection, of course. The water wasn't lonely, but all too often we are. But then how seldom do we actually remember that this is what we are? Broken fragments of a totality infinitely greater than we can ever imagine. Bounded splinters of a boundless whole that embraces us entirely, even as we are unaware of it. How often do we remember that we are actually part of this river after all? This eternally evolving stream of connection, this vast flow of consciousness, this river of love. How often do we remember that we are all one, all of us, all human beings, all living creatures, all reality? I know that in my own case, there have been long periods when I've completely forgotten this, periods when I believed that I went no further than my own skin, that's all I was. Those were lonely times, empty times. They were times when I began to wonder whether life had any meaning at all. I had forgotten the river. Suzuki goes on to say, and I quote, "Before we were born, we had no separate feelings. We were one with the universe. After we are separated by birth from this oneness, as the water falling from the waterfall is separated by the wind and the rocks, then we have separate feelings. We have difficulty because we feel separate. When you do not realize that you are one with the river or one with the universe, you have fear. You do not realize that life and death are the same thing. They are one. When you realize this fact, we have no fear of death anymore, and we have no actual difficulty in our life." End quote. So, what is it like to die? I can't help feeling that it is like a drop returning to the river that is its home, the river that it had never left, but which for a while it felt separated from. At last we will be complete. At last we will truly know the fullness of the love for which we have longed all our lives. At last we will be united with all those others who make us who we are. I believe that right now, in our limited nature, it is all far too perfect for us to grasp. We simply can't imagine such a reality. The one thing that we know is certain, however, is that we are not simply passing away. No, we are not passing away. We are passing on. We are passing on to a far, far greater reality. Looking at the single drop falling, falling, falling. Who could imagine that it was actually a river? And yet, that is what it is. It is from the river, it is for the river, and it will be the river again. So it is with each one of us and eternity, each of us and God. Death is an illusion. We are one with God, one with one another. It is who we were, it is who we are, it is who we will be. Just wait and see. Amen.